there's different styles of learning, and we want to consider those styles in the consideration that there's not necessarily one way to learn a foreign language, because part of it will depend on your style of learning, the individual style that you have. So we don't want to prescribe this one method or theory of how people learn language that doesn't take into account any individual style that someone might have. For example, one of the terms is field independence versus field dependence. And field independence is a person who's generally a very good student, who's able to learn things in a classroom, and including linguistic things, learning language in a classroom, and to able to learn grammar, for example, just as it is, without being attached necessarily to a certain context or a place or even a conversation, dialogue. So the field independent learner is able to learn things outside of the context or where that information is applied. And where the field dependent learner or the field sensitive learner has a little harder time learning things that are abstract or out of context, and prefers to learn, for example, language in a conversation, in a context, which is a more natural way anyway to learn language. Language is naturally learned more in the field, you might say. So that student would benefit from transforming the classroom into something similar to outside the classroom. And of course, they're learning outside the classroom as well when their language is actually in the context. Another term is the famous left brain versus right brain learner. So we think of the left brain learner as being very analytical and logical and looking at language as kind of a set of structures, and one thing builds on another. Kind of, you learn the simple grammar, then you learn the more complex very systematically according to the curriculum, and everything fits. There's some exceptions to the rule that you have to deal with, and irregularities and idioms and expressions and things. But the language the left brain person approaches language very systematically and logically, and also likes to know really what's going on, what the schedule for the whole course is, and what the specific lesson is going to teach that person. The right brain person we think of as more a creative type of person and sees more language as a whole. And in terms of, in this case, learning language is just a little more easygoing in the classroom, and more sees more the communicative, more the personal aspect of language learning, and wants to express themselves, and is really understanding of all the irregularities and also the non-systematic input that you get with a language. For example, if you watch a movie, for example, you're going to get very kind of unorganized input. When you watch a movie, for example, you'll have some advanced language, some simple language, and it won't be presented in any particular order. And so you just have to make sense of it as a whole. And so the left brain and the right brain learner, are very different students and have, set a different course for themselves. The ambiguity tolerance versus ambiguity intolerance. Well, again, the ambiguity intolerant learner is not comfortable with exceptions and irregularities in a language, but the ambiguity tolerant learner is again kind of more flexible and can see how language, the history of the language, has been unsystematic, and that a lot of rules are broken in everyday language, and a lot of irregularities. And also we think of ambiguity tolerant also as a person who's going to be more flexible, for example, with the cultural differences as well. So when they get into the new culture, the ambiguity tolerant person's going to be more comfortable being lost, not knowing what's going on, not understanding the language, whereas the ambiguity intolerant person is going to face a lot more frustration and feel out of control. If someone likes to be in control, then that could be stressful for them. The reflective versus impulsive learner, well, the reflective learner is very cautious, doesn't really want to practice until they feel that confidence, and wants to spend some time alone working through things before they kind of jump into the group or the application. Where the impulsive learner is just ready to go, ready to try it, make mistakes, and apologize later. And tends to, has benefits in the language classroom. If someone's impulsive, or even outside the classroom, they have that kind of fearlessness and risk-taking characteristic that does help a language learner, whereas we think of a reflective learner almost like a shy person too, who is going to learn the language and is going to learn and progress, but might need more time and doesn't really want to make as many mistakes along the way. The last one, the visual, auditory, kinesthetic learner, this one is the one that people talk about a lot. We think of the visual learner as someone who, they like to see things in order to remember them. And they also like to take notes and write a lot. They also like to read. And it helps them remember things, to copy things and write them down. And of course, during presentations, they want the instructor to use charts and graphs and images and things. The auditory learner has an ability to just understand things just when they hear them. And they have a lot of, they like to ask questions a lot as well. They like to have a lot of back and forth. They kind of learn through that question and answering process. And they don't take a lot of notes. And they also tend to do well in the classroom. Visual learners and auditory learners tend to do pretty well in traditional classrooms. The kinesthetic learner does not tend to do well in a traditional classroom because they have trouble sitting still. They learn by touching, they learn by doing, practicing, moving. So the kinesthetic learner is not as comfortable in just sitting down listening. They like to do exercises, fill things in, obviously work in groups, present, and if possible, go on field trips too. All of those benefit the kinesthetic learner. But that's a very natural way to learn also, a natural way to learn anything in normal life. Usually you learn most things outside the classroom, most of the things like for work and for everyday life. So it is very natural to be a kinesthetic learner as well. So these are some different areas of just how students vary. And it really helps too to talk to students about this, because a lot of students feel that they're not very good at learning, or they're not a strong student, or not good at learning foreign languages. So sometimes it helps them to understand that they might benefit from activities that match their learning style more, as opposed to just the teacher's learning style or most of the other students' learning style. And this is where we'll get later into some strategies that students have based on their learning style. But for now, we're just trying to identify different learning styles that students have.